Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Russell here, and today the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada gave a big long speech, and reporters were able to actually question him afterwards, and as a result, we were able to get some new information. So we're gonna dive right into the information in this video. We're gonna talk about the reasons why they made the interest rate decision that they did yesterday. We're gonna talk about their thoughts on the new high inflation numbers, their thoughts on the Canadian real estate market, and the two things, and these are new things, that the Bank of Canada is most concerned about going into the future. They think it could have a big impact on the future of Canada. But before we dive into the information, make sure to check out the links in the description. You can open up investing accounts and take your wealth into your own hands, and check out the Canada Money Mastery course, 40% off with that coupon code GROW. And now let's dive into what exactly was said in this press conference / speech. Tim Lane, the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, started out by going over basically an overview of what's happening in the Canadian economy right now, saying, hey, we just had 275,000 job losses in April and May, and that boosted our unemployment rate, and it's still over 8%. But he did sort of contrast with that with a positive in his eyes, that the housing market has provided a strong boost to the economy, and we're going to get more into that in a minute. Then they brought up what to some is the elephant in the room, and that is inflation. Now, on inflation, they made sure to emphasize that for a very, very long time, inflation was actually under their 2% target. They're sort of comfortable in the band of 1 to 3%, but 2% is what they're mandated to target inflation at. And they said, hey, for years, we had trouble even getting to our 2% rate. So he used that as a preface to say, hey, we do recognize that right now we have 3.5% inflation, but they're actually not all that worried about it, and I'll tell you why. They blame this inflation on three different things. Now, many of you who are watching this will know that the Bank of Canada measures inflation with something called the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index, essentially a basket of goods, and they sort of track how much it would take for a Canadian to buy that basket of goods over time to measure inflation. Now, they're saying that certain components of that CPI, well, they've gone up, but they're not expected to stay up. The main one they mentioned was gas prices, saying that they're higher than usual, but that doesn't seem like it's long term. Now, the second thing they talked about, and if you watched the video yesterday, you might have heard this when I was talking about it, it's something called base year effects. Essentially, the CPI, the measure of inflation, well, it takes into consideration what inflation was 12 months ago. Now, because in April and March and even May as well, all of these data points back in 2020, well, they had super low inflation and even in some cases deflation because of the decreased demand to buy goods when everyone was sort of hunkering down at the beginning of the pandemic, unsure of what was actually going to go down and how bad things were going to be. Now, he's saying that compared to last year, well, this has sort of just boosted the number because it's sort of comparing to that trough in the chart, the lower number in the chart, and that over the next number of months, it's likely going to stay that way, but they're expecting that this is going to go away once we start comparing to months that are more normal and aren't at the beginning of a major global pandemic. And the third thing that they blamed it on is supply chain issues. Now, you've probably already heard of this. Lots of people bring it up with the lumber shortage and the rise in lumber prices, as well as the semiconductor or the microchip, the computer chip shortage that we're dealing with right now. They're blaming this on supply chain issues. Now, essentially what this is different parts around the world are gathered from different countries around the world, and because of the different COVID restrictions and various stoppages of production, well, that's caused a lot of different bottlenecks in the supply chain, meaning it's harder to produce and make goods, and as a result, supply is down and prices are up. But they believe that this bottleneck, it's going to actually sort of open up here and get back to normal in the next little while, so they're actually not too concerned that these supply chain bottlenecks are going to be a major issue long term. So they don't think that inflation is here to stay, but they do expect it, and they emphasize this. They expect it throughout the rest of the summer, that we're going to hover around this 3% range, 3.5%, that's roughly where we are now, staying in the threes. Now, if we see inflation go up to 4, and this is what I'm going to be keeping my eye on, well, we could start to worry here that we've got more inflation than the Bank of Canada expects, and we're expected to get that data in about a week, I believe next Wednesday, so I'll bring you that information too on what the new inflation data is, and if it's going to stay around in the threes like the Bank of Canada expects. But obviously, as a result of them thinking that inflation is going to go down in the future, they can afford to keep their interest rates super low, or at least that's what they think. And they explained that their decision yesterday to keep the overnight rate at 0.25%, well, and in addition is the quantitative easing program, essentially the Bank of Canada's bond buying program or quantitative quantitative easing, where they just buy up a whole bunch of Bank of Canada bonds and create new money to buy that as a way to keep interest rates down for the long term. Well, they're saying that they can keep this quantitative easing program going at the same rate that it is, currently $3 billion a week, and they can afford to keep interest rates low because they're not expecting long-term inflation. Now, when the press conference finally opened up to all the reporters that were there, well, they got some questions and they took some of their time to question him on inflation. And they said, hey, how are you reconciling what the average everyday Canadian is seeing? Anecdotally, so many people are feeling like, hey, rent prices are going up. All of the things that I need to pay for, prices are going up, and people in their everyday lives are seeing inflation based on the eye check. How do you recognize or reconcile the fact that Canadians are saying this and they're seeing this, but your CPI data isn't actually telling you the same thing that they're seeing? And Tim Lane, well, he didn't really have all that much of an answer for this question, sort of just reiterating his points before that they're expecting some of these inflationary pressures to go down over time. But it does bring up something interesting that many critics have said about the Consumer Price Index, that it doesn't actually accurately represent a Canadian's average life. One of the most interesting points that I've seen that critics have brought up is the fact that the CPI doesn't include house prices explicitly. It includes people's monthly mortgage payments. Now, there's a little bit of an issue here because monthly mortgage payments, well, they're largely impacted by interest rates. If interest rates are low, monthly mortgage payments will be low, even if there's a little bit more on the top of the overall purchase price of a home, right? Now, it gets even more interesting when you consider, hey, the Bank of Canada controls interest rates and they're actively trying to push them down right now. So that's just an interesting take on the CPI and how it might not exactly reflect how a Canadian's spending and what inflation they're seeing on their day-to-day. Then a reporter brought up something that was pretty interesting. He said, hey, Tim Lane, Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, what do you think of this stat? And he went on to say that 25% of the currency in the world has been printed since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, to that, Tim Lane said, hey, no, it hasn't. That doesn't sound right to me. And he sort of misinterpreted what I think the spirit of this reporter's question was. Tim Lane sort of replied to this as if the reporter was only asking about the cash and the loonies and toonies and the actual bills that have been printed, and largely there hasn't been a huge amount of that added into the system, but that makes sense because we're not actually using cash as much as we used to. Instead, I believe that this reporter was more asking about the monetary supply in general, taking into account not only the cash, but all the ones and zeros on computers that have largely been the ledger or the track of the money in the Canadian system and across the world. I think it's more Hey, so because I'm a dummy, I didn't realize that my mic wasn't working during this section while I was recording, but essentially what I'm saying here is that this reporter was actually asking about money supply, and you can see on this graph here how the money supply has gone up since 2020. This covers everything in the economy, not just the paper dollar bills. A little bit disappointed to hear that Tim Lane didn't really have a take on all of the new money supply that's been added, sort of just taking this opportunity to say, hey, I think your question was just about the actual dollar bills. Now, on housing, Tim Lane had some comments. Earlier, you might remember that I mentioned he referred to the boom in housing as a boost to the economy. And he explained that this boost was actually happening for two different reasons, this boom in the housing market. One was the narrative of COVID, right? People being stuck in their homes, not having as many other things to spend money on, resulting in them buying more home and being incentivized to get a little bit more space and spend more and just buy more and more homes. And the demand for homes has gone up as a result of that. So one reason was that narrative that they've been really pushing, saying that that's a reason for the housing boom. Now, the other one, he did acknowledge the fact that interest rates are so low has been a major problem for real estate, or rather a major reason that we're seeing real estate prices go up. Now, when Tim Lane was pressed a little bit harder by other reporters about the fact that low interest rates has resulted in real estate prices going up and how that's getting out of reach for many Canadians and they can't actually buy a home right now, well, he sort of says a similar talking point that we've heard a lot, saying, well, we need to support the broader economy and not just think about real estate prices. Now, this reminds me of something that Tiff Macklem said a little while back, saying we need to take the growth that we can get in this economy. Essentially, when real estate prices go up, maybe more people are able to access that money from the growth of their real estate through something like a home equity line of credit or a cash out refinance. And when homeowners get that money, they can then go out into the economy and spend it, and overall that's good for the economy. Also, and this next person said it a little bit more pointedly, this is Stephen Polos, the former governor of the Bank of Canada. Well, on an interview that was aired about a month ago, he said, hey, I recognize that what the government of what the Bank of Canada is doing right now is actually causing real estate to go up and up and up. But he said he would gladly take a booming housing market over a broader and larger full economy recession where we could see people losing jobs and all of these other negative impacts from a recession. He said, hey, I would take a booming housing market over that any day. In this press conference, though, Tim Lane did bring up the fact that the Bank of Canada believes that many people are buying homes based on extrapolative expectations, right? Thinking that there may be excess exuberance in the market. I'm using these central banker words. Essentially, they're saying people are buying homes expecting that they're going to go up in value, and the Bank of Canada doesn't like that, and they're a little bit worried about it. But speaking of what the Bank of Canada is worried about, they actually went on to talk about this the most. This is what they emphasize the most. It's two different things that we haven't heard from the central bank before. They're scared about scarring and digital transformation. Scarring and digital transformation. These two things are making it really hard for the Bank of Canada to predict what's going to happen next in the economy, saying that they've never actually seen an economy like this. Now, we'll start with scarring. They're worried that the economy is going to be scarred by the fact that many people have been out of work for a very long time, and as a result, they may have gotten a little bit rusty with their working skills, and that could, on a mass scale, when you take into consideration every single Canadian, have an impact on the future of Canada's growth. Then there's the digital transformation of Canada, and this is what they most emphasized in this speech, essentially saying the pandemic sort of sped up this route that Canada was already on, and it's created structural changes in the economy because of the new adoption of digital technologies, making it harder to gauge what's actually happening in our economy. He brought up things like automation, AI, machine learning, and how the companies can use these to cut costs, and potentially how this could take Canadians' jobs. Now, he didn't frame this adoption of new technology to cut costs in business as an entirely bad thing, but he did have some concern over the fact that they believe that potentially in Canada, we're not setting ourselves up to be ready for the future jobs that are going to be left over, even when this AI and this automation and this tech really starts to take hold of our economy. The Bank of Canada believes that skill shortages in key areas could be an issue as we transition into this new digital economy, and they're especially worried about marginalized groups and marginalized Canadians. We're talking about women and racialized Canadians and young people, and how they're disproportionately the ones who are going to be affected by this because they disproportionately work in the sectors that are most likely to be disrupted by AI and automation and all of this new tech. And they question, hey, how can we get ready so that we can make this fair for everyone as this economy transitions? Now, they also raised some concerns because Bank of Canada isn't actually able to control how people are educated and how they get ready for this transition, saying that it's not in their mandate to comment on how the government of Canada can get trained in the skills of the future to prevent this from happening. So obviously there's a whole bunch of information here, and I want to know what you think about it. Let me know in the comments. What do you think of their interest rate decision? What do you think about inflation? Do they have the right take on that? Is it going to go down over the long term? What do you think about them and their thoughts on housing and how they need to support the broader economy and not really worry about real estate right now and just sort of let it keep on running the way it has been? And what do you think about this scarring and digital transformation worry that they've newly brought to the surface here in this most recent press conference? No matter what you think, I want to hear from you down there in the comments. And while you're down there, check out the links in the description where you can open up your own investing accounts, or check out the Canada Money Mastery Program where we teach everything about Canadian money and investing and all the things you should have been taught about money in high school, to be frank. So you can check that out, see if it's a good fit for you. And with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.